So hi guys, this is the second panel of the day. So this is the 3 to 4 o'clock one. This is Deadly as the female, and we've got Tana Collins, Wendy H. Jones, and Christine Laurenson. So I'm just going to start with Tana Collins is an Amazon top 10 best-selling author with her 5-book series of Inspector Jim Crothers series set in the picturesque East Nuke of Fife. She's also a crime writing tutor, and she has a 4-week beginner's crime writing course that you can maybe ask her about. Then we've got Christine, who was shortlisted for the Kelpie Prize in 2016, and in 2017 she won a Scottish Book Trust New Writers Award. She has two poems published in SBT publications, Journeys and Secrets and Confessions, and a short story published in the New Shetlander magazine. She's also self-published 3 books, Jesme's Ghost, Dark Business is a crime thriller for adults, and Dead Short, a collection of her short stories. She's in the process of editing 2 books for young people and working on the first drafts of 2 crime thrillers for adult readership. She also goes under the name C.G. Laurenson, because when I looked her up on Amazon, I was like, I can't find Christine Laurenson, but then it's C.G. Laurenson. And then we've also got, again, Wendy H. Jones, who's an award-winning Scottish crime writer and public speaker. Wendy is the author of the best-selling D.I. Shora Mackenzie mysteries and the Cass Claymore investigations. She also writes Ferguson Flora mysteries, which are getting a new rebrand soon.
There'll still be the Ferguson Flora mysteries, though, but the titles are changing of each book.
And also the children's picture book Bertie the Buffalo, if you caught our panel yesterday with Pammy Bale. She's the president of the Scottish Association of Writers and the secretary for the Society of Authors in Scotland. So welcome, ladies. I'll let you guys take over.
Thank you, Lindsay.
Well, it's an absolute pleasure to be here with you, ladies. I'm so excited. And I know we're going to be reading from our books, and I love your books, so I know the people who are listening will as well. So, Tana, did you want to kick off? No pressure, but do you want to kick off?
Yeah, no, that's lovely. I will do. Wendy, thanks very much. So I'm going to be reading from the 5th book in the Jim Carruthers series, In Deep Water. That came out in August last year. And I'll just read, it's a very short prologue, and then just a couple of paragraphs from chapter 1. So here we go. Tom Ramsay lies on his back on a grassy verge. As he stares up at the blue sky, frothy bubbles of blood run down the side of his mouth. The noise of the seabirds all around him are deafening, as the deep guttural grunts of the cormorants compete with the cooing of the guillemots. The sky is a swirling black mass of birds. The hysterical cries growing louder and louder as they constantly launch themselves from the rocks. He feels the sharp, painful cuts of his wounds. His body is cold, so cold, and he shivers. The slim yellow bill and dark eye of a kittiwake come into view as it flies low over his body and lands on a rock. The high nasal sound of the gull mocks him as he lies, body battered, clothes ripped to shreds. Above the cry of the seabirds, Tom hears the boat being dragged to the water's edge. He tries to call out as the chug of the motorboat roars into life, but he knows that with every passing second, his assailant is putting more and more distance between them, until the boat will be so far out in the Firth of Forth that the small island will be no more than just a distant speck. At that moment, Tom realizes he's been left to die alone, with only the company of 100,000 birds. His last thought is the hope that the engine revs from the boat won't frighten the nesting seabirds. Monday, 10 a.m. D.I. Jim Carruthers sighed as he switched on his computer. Unless something more interesting came in, it was going to be another day of organizing role profiles and training courses. Not his favorite type of work. His phone rang. He placed his glasses on top of his graying head and took the call. Jim. The voice was that of DC Willie Brown. Carruthers wondered what the older balding police officer with the comb over wanted. We've just had a call from a woman in Anstruther. She wants to report her husband missing. Carruthers picked up a pen and a piece of paper. It crossed his mind that living in the same wee coastal village, he might know the man. Name? Robert Patterson. He's 62 and is a local fisherman. Carruthers's heart lurched. He did know the man. So that's my reading from that 5th book, In Deep Water.
In Deep Water. That was very good. Oh my goodness, that sent shivers down my spine, I tell you. It really did. Listen, I'm putting the pressure on you guys while I relax and drink my coffee for a couple of minutes. So Christine, do you want to read now?
Okay, I'll be reading from this, which is, whoops, get it right. There it is, Dark Business.
Yeah.
Right. And it's close to the beginning and the phone's ringing. So just imagine a phone ringing. Hello, Fraser? He couldn't remember even giving her the number, but he must have done. It was ex-directory. He shivered, naked, apart from a damp towel tied around his waist. Water dripped off him, making a ticking sound on the ice-cold quarry tiles. His feet began to cool and ache. Laurie? I'm sorry, bad time. No, you're all right. Everything okay? There's something on the beach. I can't go out there. I'm sorry. Fraser heard the ragged catch in her voice and knew he had no option. Give me half an hour. As he drove, rattling past open fields, he saw that the grass had silvered under a thin covering of frost and was glad of his winter tires. But every now and then he felt the jolt and slide of icy patches under the wheels. The turning was marked by a tall sycamore standing alone by the side road, its branches stunted and twisted by the pitiless beating of near constant winds. He swung the wheel and headed down the narrow lane, a rutted track of hard frozen mud, jewelled with pockets of ice. The road rose steadily before dropping again towards the cottage. Laurie Gray stood waiting at the gate, swamped in an oversized sweater, curly brown hair flying out behind her like a tattered flag. She was at the car door before Fraser had even put the handbrake on. It's on the beach, she said, as Fraser climbed out of the car and edged around her. What is? I don't know. Fraser's heart sank, but he could see the terror in her eyes and forced himself to be calm and reassuring. Don't worry, I'll go and see, he said. Over there, I couldn't go in case it was... I'm sure it is. At least I thought so, and now the tide's gone out and it's there. Fraser let his gaze follow her gestures to a spot on the beach, where a pile of seaweed lay in a small mound. I'll check it out. Maybe you could put the kettle on. Fraser touched Laurie's arm lightly as he said this. She rewarded his gesture with a cold stare, then turned and almost ran back into the cottage. Fraser watched her go, and then set off down to the small shingle beach, pulling his jacket around him in an effort to keep out the cold. As he crunched over the pebbles, he began to make out what looked like a pile of wet clothes. As he got closer, he saw long tendrils of light brown hair clinging sodden to the stones, and stretched out towards him a small white hand, its fingers curling softly in towards the palm, beckoning him to come closer. He wished he could refuse.
I like that. Oh, you've stopped that at a really good part. He wished he could refuse. Oh, my goodness. I have to read the rest of this book. That's amazing. Oh, heavens. Now, listen, I've got to live up to this now, ladies. You know, 2 excellent readings and brilliant books. I'm going to be really greedy, if you don't mind, folks.
Do it.
I'm going to do 2 readings because I'm greedy. No, not because I'm greedy, but because I have a humorous series and a more gritty series. So I'm going to start off just reading a small bit out of the more gritty series. Then I'll read a little bit out of the humorous series, just for a bit of, contrast. Although I have to say, I try to be a bit humorous in my gritty series as well. Otherwise, people might get a bit... And I'm going to start by reading out of the 3rd one, Killer's Cross. Now, the reason I'm reading out of Killer's Cross is because it was the first one that came to hand. I just decided to do a lucky dip. And this one came out. So there we go. So, lying on the damp earth, listening to the grating of a rusty lock, she knows her life is about to end. She is alone in this prison. Thick darkness, like a shroud, engulfs her body in its muffled tendrils. She bites back a scream and shouts, "Help! Help me!" Ineffectual, her voice fades into the inky night. She shifts her body. No comfort. She cannot move far, chained as she is. Tense muscles strain against the rapidly cooling metal. She feels pain, unimaginable pain. Her breathing quickens as panic takes hold. She forces herself to relax, to think, to take stock, uses her mind to explore. She uses her fingers and her feet to survey her surroundings. Wood, dirt floor, the dank smell of wet earth. A shed, an outhouse, a barn. Then a delicate tickle against her skin. Soft, gentle, it travels up her bare leg, prickling along every tiny nerve end, creeping, crawling, relentless. She kicks, tries to push it off with her hands. The chains stop her. She can't reach. It's still there. There is no escape. Another joins it. Myriad others. Spiders, her worst fear. They are all over. Shaking, she screams, then snaps her mouth shut as she feels them on her face. She is rigid. There is no way out. She prays for death. That's the first chapter. Then, when you turn the page into chapter 2, flashing an ID card, the flapper steps through the dimly lit red brick archway towards the body of the dead vicar. It's not often you find a flapper at a crime scene, not in Dundee anyway. Shona is the flapper, more commonly known to the good people of Dundee as Detective Inspector Shona Mackenzie. She doesn't need to look too closely at the body to know this particular vicar has not died well. His face is set in a death mask grimace, his clothes torn, and a cross has been carved on his chest. So that's why it's called Killer's Cross, which is the third book in the Detective Inspector Shona Mackenzie mysteries. I thought I'd better read to that part so everybody knew what the cross was about. Then, Antiques and Alibis is Cass Claymore Investigates, and this is humorous mystery. It's not meant to take itself seriously. I'll read just the first chapter. The first chapter is only one page, so we can relax, really. I'm Cass Claymore, redhead, biker chick, ex-ballerina, and private investigator. Oh, did I mention the dead body at my feet? The worst part is I'm not sure if I killed him or someone else performed the dirty deed. My days are not usually cluttered up with the recently deceased, so a difficult call for me. Aged about 30s, clean-shaven and wearing designer brogues. Not your average lowlife who'd end up dead, unless the shoes were nicked, of course. The way my week was panning out, I'd probably bumped off some visiting laird. Might he have died of natural causes? Bending over, I peered at him. He didn't have the look of someone who'd shuffled off this mortal coil voluntarily. What had I got myself into? A queasy feeling started in the pit of my stomach. Turning away from the corpse, I became reacquainted with the hummus sandwich I'd had for my lunch. I pulled out my phone and pressed the first 9. So that's the opening to Cass Claymore. Sorry, ladies, I've taken up 2.
Don't apologise. That was great, Wendy. I think we both really enjoyed that.
Well, I enjoy reading anyway. It's all
very different series and very different books.
Yeah, absolutely, definitely. To be honest, I started with a gritty crime, and then I thought, oh, I quite fancy writing something funny. I wonder if I could. And apparently I can.
Yeah, you pulled it off. So how many have you got in the Cass Claymore series now?
There's only one, but the second one is almost finished. So
great.
And if you look at the titles, that first book was called Antiques and Alibis. The second one's called Blood and Bones. The third one's going to be called A Cluster of Corpses. I've really set myself up here. We might only get as far as H. I might have died a death by H.
Whoa. But
I'm not entirely.
Am I right in thinking you've got 6 books in your Shona Mackenzie series?
Yeah, 6. Yeah.
Is Shona being given a bit of a breather at the moment? Will you go back to
no,
7?
Shona 7's about to come out. It's called Killer's Curse. And it's set in Dundee and the place next door to it, New Orleans. Randomly, because they're so close to each other. No, it's not randomly. It's very well thought out and plotted.
Brilliant. Have you got a date for that book coming out?
Very soon. I keep saying that. People will be sending me, poison pen letters going, very soon means it's very stretchable for you, Wendy.
Oh, okay.
It'll be out by April. How many books have you got in your series, Tana, and what are you planning more?
Yeah, so I've got 5 in the Inspector Carruthers series. Jim Carruthers is on a bit of a break at the moment.
Oh yeah.
I'm writing a brand new. I've got a first book that I'm trying to write at the moment, and hopefully a brand new series set in it's actually southeast of England, Hastings, just outside Hastings from where I come from.
All right.
With a female detective. So we'll see how that goes. But Christine, what are you doing at the moment? Because you've got Dark Matter, and you've got 2 books in the. I mean, I loved Jim Sees Ghosts.
Yes.
So I haven't read the follow-up. Correct me if I'm wrong. I think he's slightly older in the follow-up. Is he about 14, Jim C?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Yeah. At the moment, I've got 2 or 3 different stories that I keep switching between, so I need to get my head down and get on with it. But yeah, it's just chaos.
Christine, I love the fact that you have got a unique twist for your character, because you've got a detective in the police, but he's currently on suspension in the book I read. I mean, what made you decide to write about a character where they weren't actually doing the job that you think they would be doing in a detective book?
Well, I quite like books where there's a history to a character, so you can read the story and try and figure out what's made them the way they are. So there's that aspect of it. There was also the same, that nowadays people get tried on social media. A rumor will spread around, and then everybody thinks they're guilty automatically, and that's not necessarily the case. So, I mean, you can be suspended from a job while they're investigating what's going on, rather than because you've been a bad boy, So there is that. But, and it also means, because of the situation, that there's the potential for colleagues to fall out with one another, a bit of drama.
Yeah, that's a good point, really. Yeah, it is. You can be suspended, and they're looking into you when you've done nothing whatsoever, but somebody's just decided you have,
Mm-hmm.
Trial by social media, is that what it's called? I think.
So, yeah.
I thought it was quite interesting, ladies, when I was reading both your books. And it was just the fact with Christine, you've temporarily suspended D.I. Fraser Gilchrist, but Wendy, or Shona Mackenzie in the first book, is newly promoted. So that's really interesting.
Yeah, poor Shona has no clue what she's got herself into, because she's got a team that are all arguing with each other, a promotion, and the boss from hell. I mean, she's like, what the heck have I done here? It's just...
Wendy, is that why she's got something to prove? Or is it also because of a failed relationship? So her personal life.
Yeah, it's a bit of both. She's not really very keen on the male species to start with in the first book, because her husband's up and left her. I mean, you hear that, you know that very early in the book. So it's not, her husband's up and left her and moved in with a younger woman. So, and she's not that old. So, it's like, she's in a bad mood with men. But so she's trying to prove that, she's better than him, but she's also trying to prove that she can actually do this job as a detective inspector, especially since she's recently got the gig, having moved from Oxford. She's from Dundee, but she was brought up in Oxford, where her father went when she was like a toddler. So she's trying to prove that, you know, she's got what it takes to do all this and fit into Dundee as well. So the poor woman's proven herself as a Dundonian, proven herself to be better than her husband, proven herself to her boss, proving herself to her team. Yeah, and herself, I suppose, because
it's got a lot of change that's all going on at the same time, and it's trying to navigate all that change.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. Talking of openings, actually, Tana, because I was interested. The opening lines of In Deep Water, I mean, they're amazing. They're literally, they're outstanding. They just grab you from the get-go. I was like, oh, this is a book I've got to read, you know.
That's wonderful.
And I meant got to read it because it drew me in, not got to read it because I'm on the channel. Yeah, there's a difference. Oh, this is a book I've got to read. And this is a book I've got to read, which is what I meant, yeah. So how do you go about writing your opening sentences? And really, how much time do you spend crafting them?
You know, for me, probably like a lot of writers, those opening sentences and that opening scene to a book is vitally important. I spend a lot of time on it. So I was thinking about this question. I was thinking I'll probably draft it and redraft it maybe about 10 to 15 times.
Mm-hmm.
That's quite a lot, isn't it? But I usually have a prologue in my books. I think probably maybe 3 out of 5 of my books I have a prologue. And I use the prologue to sort of set the scene, to introduce the characters, particularly the victim and probably the crime. And the victim is the most important character in the book because they have no voice.
Mm.
And I heard someone recently say that if you can engage your reader early on, and get them to empathize with the victim, then it's much more powerful. I don't know, is there an echo when I'm speaking? Because that's just part of my end. I don't know if anybody else can hear it.
There's very, very occasionally a little bit of echo, but it's not anything that would put us off, you know. I can still understand everything you're saying, Tana.
That's good.
Again, I can lip read.
That just sort of immediately started. It was fine when I started talking.
No, you're fine. You're absolutely fine. It sounds great. I mean, Christine, your openings, do you think a lot about them, or does it come naturally, or?
Well, I write them frequently. I think that's the answer.
Right.
But I'll keep changing my mind about how to start a story. I find that the most difficult thing. But yeah, I think it was weird because I was speaking to Tana before, and essentially one of her books and my book have very similar prologues.
Oh, right.
Yeah. So I've suddenly discovered I'm far from original, but, you know, we'll not worry about that.
Well, in all fairness, Christine, they do say there's only ever been 6 books written, you know, and the rest of us are just rehashing them ever since. One sci-fi, one romance, one fantasy, one crime, and everybody else is just repeating it, you know, in some form in our own voice. So, you know, I'm interested, ladies, about prologues, because my very first book had a prologue, and then everybody fell out with prologues, and they're like, prologues, we don't like prologues. So I just put prologues in and the rest and called them chapter 1.
I know there was something recently on Twitter because I had a lovely crime writing student that I took under my wing, and he asked me about prologues, and he said, look, I do notice that you have prologues. But I thought what was happening at the moment, they had fallen out of fashion. But it's amazing when you pick up books by really established writers, new books, a lot of them still have prologues. I love a prologue. I really love them. But you could equally maybe put your prologue in that first chapter. So,
yeah. So that's why I like prologues, but I just started calling them chapter 1 instead. So,
I think,
to be honest, I don't think... Sorry, Christine?
One of the problems used to be that people would dump information in the prologue, and I think that's what it's like.
Yeah.
You know, you don't want an info dump at the beginning of a book because it puts you right off.
Yeah.
Well, it
a bit
me
like,
anyway.
as you know, well, if they already know, why are we saying it again?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I'm going to ask, if I may, Wendy, I'm going to ask Christine a quick question. As we're talking about opening scenes, and this brings me to a question I'd love to ask Christine. Christine, in Dark Business, I noticed this. Your opening scene features the victim, so we're very quickly into the action. And you bring that scene to life so vividly that we can almost feel that poor lass's cracked ribs and bruised face. I was going to say, was that a conscious decision to write the opening scene from the victim's point of view?
Well, yeah, because I wanted the victim to be someone that you would care about.
Goes back
in that
to
particular story. Yeah.
Yeah.
Got to be a real person. Yeah.
No, you do it so well, because it's a very emotional scene. You're there with her, and you can actually feel her sort of stress and her anxiety. You know something awful is about to happen, and you do. You make us kind of empathize with her, which is really good.
Yeah. Thank you.
But honestly, am I allowed to say to Wendy, I don't want to take over, ladies, but
Oh no, please do take over. Please
as we're talking about opening scenes and opening lines, I know you read from was that your third or your fourth DI show?
My third Detective Inspector.
Well, would you mind very much if I just read out to Christine and the viewers really the opening scenes of your first D.I. Shona Mackenzie book, because it's fabulous writing. I absolutely loved it.
Oh, thank you.
I'm going to read them out. As I stared down the barrel of that gun, I had a feeling deep inside that this would not end well. How did I find myself here, deep in the bowels of a frozen Scottish wood, eye to eye with the business end of a Browning pistol? I mean, how fabulous. And as we know, Wendy has had many years in the army, so you will know. Would you know your way around a Browning pistol? Or
no, I don't know my way around a Browning pistol. I never ever was ever given I know my way around a rifle, because I was allowed to. But it's the most bizarre thing, because if you go to war, you're given a pistol. I never went to war, just to defend yourself. I was a nurse, just to defend yourself and your patient, yeah? But you never trained with a pistol. You always trained with a rifle. So it was the most bizarre thing in my life. No, I don't know anything about Browning pistols, nothing. But I do know. I mean, I do know enough to look things up. So, you know, yeah. So because I do know about guns, but I don't know that much about guns.
That is fabulous. Those first few lines are fabulous. And I noticed in those lines, you're actually writing in first person in that particular scene.
Yeah.
And that can create a real intimacy, can't it, between character and reader? Was that your preferred method in that book? Or because have you changed over
what happened was, in that one, it's not all in the first person. Most of it's in the third person. But you get to see things from the killer's point of view and the detective's point of view. Now, the killer's point of view is in the first person. That first scene is actually Detective Inspector Shona Mackenzie that's saying that. And that's a flash forward to later in the book.
Yeah.
A scene later in the book, much later in the book.
That's right.
So I deliberately did it like that because it gave a sense of intimacy with the main character, even though you don't know it's the main character. The killers, so there is first and third person in the book, but it's mainly third person. But the killer scenes are in the first person because you get to know what the killer is doing and why they're doing it.
Right.
So,
yep.
Yeah.
That makes
you get to know their story.
Yeah.
And I do that in all my books. All my books, you get the killer's story as well as the, not in Cass Claymore, in the Detective Inspector Shona Mackenzie mystery. It's a dual storyline, the killer and the police.
I think that's a good thing, isn't it? It brings some balance. I think if you've got some backstory to the killer, they're not just, they're a much more nuanced character. If you can bring in some of their backstory, show us why they've become the person they are.
Yeah.
You know, their weaknesses and actually interesting if you can get your readers to empathize with the baddie in the book to some degree.
Yeah, no, that's true. Yeah, because to be honest, nobody's 100% bad. You know, even sociopaths have wives that love them sometimes. You know, nobody's 100% bad. And how often have you heard in real life when they say, you know, somebody's arrested and they say, oh, he was such a nice person. I never suspected, you know. So, as we've had recently in Dundee, which wasn't very good.
So following on from that, could I ask you both what comes first for you, whether it's character or plot?
Oh, shall I answer that?
Yeah, carry on, Tana.
First. Oh my goodness. Right. So, well, I think both are important, aren't they? Character and plot. I think when I first started writing my first book, which was Robbing the Dead, that was the debut novel and the first in the series. I woke up in the middle of the night and I had a plot. So I didn't at that point think about the characters. The characters came later for me. I just had an opening scene of a young man who'd been really beaten to death. It was pretty horrible. But out of that, it grew into a police procedural. So then I had to come up with an inspector. And that's how the creation of Jim Carruthers was born. But I think with subsequent books, I've then really looked at characterization before plot. You know, they are important, but I think for me, I think actually also interestingly looking at Amazon reviews. I was looking at Amazon reviews. I was trying not to look at the 1-star reviews, but I was looking at the ones where people really enjoyed the book, and it was the characters that they really loved. I mean, they were talking about plots, but it was definitely the characters and characterization that was driving the plots. What about you, Wendy? For you, which does one come first? Is one more important?
Well, in terms of my Detective Inspector Shona Mackenzie mysteries, obviously, I came up with the plot first, although it was a very loose idea of a plot because I'm not a plotter, I'm a pantster. Yeah, but I did have the plot in my head, but I also had to develop the character because the character needed to suit it. And after that, it has to be plot because I always develop the killer's character. I know who the killer is for each book, and I have to develop their character. But obviously, because I'm given both storylines, but I've already got the characters of the police. Now, obviously, they have to develop as characters because they can't just stay the same or everybody will go, oh, same old, same old. So that was definitely, it's a mixture of both, really, for that. With Cass Claymore, it was definitely character because she's absolutely useless. I mean, basically, as I said, she's a redheaded, motorbike riding, ex-ballerina who inherits a private detective agency and accidentally hires an ex-con dwarf and an octogenarian. So she's just
fabulous.
And I had to think, so I started with the characters. Now, the character of Quill, who's her sidekick in that book, Cameron McQuilleran, he's called Quill to his friends. He's the ex-con dwarf. He strolled in bold as brass and told me he was staying. He wasn't meant to be in it. But he strolled in and he said, I'm your new character. And I went, hang on a minute here. Nobody invited you. And he went, no, but I'm staying. And actually, he steals the show. You know, even though Cass Claymore is the actual main character, all the women fall in love with Quill. I'm talking in real life, in the book they do, but in real life, all the women fall in love with Quill. They want to marry Quill because he's a bit of a bad boy, but he's a charmer. You know,
and women love charmers.
Oh, women love charmers. You know, even if he's a bad boy, he's a charmer. He charms all the women. So, you know, it's definitely character driven in Cass Claymore because Cass Claymore has no clue what she's doing. No clue. She's just hopeless. She's not a private detective. She's a ballerina. So, you know, she solves everything by chance, you know.
She's also very sassy, isn't she? She's got a lot of attitude, a lot of courage, Fiercely independent is part of. When I was looking at Cass Claymore, I was thinking this has to be Wendy is Cass Claymore. Cass Claymore is. I mean, there must be some overlap. You know, fiercely independent. Both your main characters, you know, they've got that feisty, passionate, you know, a real sense of adventure.
Which is probably really based them on me. Yeah, I didn't base them on me, but there's probably aspects of me in it. But I have to say, people say when they think of Shona Mackenzie, they always hear me speaking. So actually, talking of speaking, I've got a question for you, Christine, because I loved your dialogue. Seriously, your dialogue is brilliant. You know, it had me hooked and had me really rooting for the characters. So I wanted to know, in terms of dialogue, how do you go about writing such authentic dialogue and yet still make it accessible to the reader?
Well, although I based it in Aberdeen, because that was the only city I ever lived in, I couldn't trust myself to write the Aberdeen dialect faithfully because it's been so long since I lived there and things change. So I didn't want to make a mess of it. So I just thought about the rhythms of the speech. Because as a kid, I moved around all over Britain. Well, all over England anyway, with my dad's job. So you go to a new place and you had to adopt the local vernacular very quickly. Otherwise, you were ostracized in the playground. You'll know that.
Yes.
I remember going from Kent to Lancashire and being surrounded by kids saying, "Go on, say something," because I spoke like a Kent lass, you know. I said "parf" and "barf" and all that kind of thing. So, yeah, I mean, accents are difficult when you first go there. When I first went to Aberdeen, I couldn't understand my Auntie Margaret because she was from Torry and it was really broad Aberdonian. So my Uncle Henry had to translate for me for the first 2 or 3 days while I was there. But I realized eventually it was the stress. You know, each word has a rhythm and the stress would be in a different part of the word. So essentially when I was writing it, I was very conscious of the fact that you can ostracize people, alienate people if you use too much dialect. So I wanted to try to avoid that. I'd throw in a smattering here and there, but I was trying to avoid being too closeted in the local lingo, if you like. It was the same with Jeamesy, actually, because I couldn't actually write that in Shetland dialect well, and I wouldn't want to do it anyway because it would mean half the people in the country wouldn't be able to read it. Yeah.
I have to say it is difficult because you want to give a flavour of the fact it's Scottish without alienating people from, you know, America, Australia, India, or wherever, even England, where they've no clue what you're talking about. You know, I had an issue with it was not dialogue, but there's a hill in the middle of Dundee and it's called the Law. That's what it's called. Law is the old Scottish name for a hill, except in the book I have to call it the Law Hill. Well, people from Dundee keep sending me messages going, "It's not called the Law Hill, it's called the Law." And I said, "Yeah, I appreciate that, but I'll get messages from all over the world going, 'What do you mean there's a body being found on the law?' That means something to people in Dundee. It doesn't mean something to anybody else."
It is, you know, it's really difficult. I have to say, when I was, particularly with my first book, I am English, but I've been living up in Edinburgh about 25 years now.
Oh, well, we'll let you off. We'll say
Thank you. Am I allowed to become tartanized? I've invented that word. That is one of my new words, by the way. So hopefully it's not offensive.
It's marvelous.
But I think it's lovely. But, you know, it was so difficult to write the dialect because, as you both said, I wanted to put a smattering in. I wanted to give a local flavour to Fife. But I didn't want to, A, use the wrong words, B, alienate other people. And so I put a lot in. Then I took it out. It was awful. And then I had a smattering in. This was just before I pressed the send button to send back to the publishers. And I got myself into a complete muddle, So I thought, oh, my goodness me. But I think I got away with it, just the smattering. But I did get comments back from my editor saying, I think you've made a mistake. You used a word here, and I think you mean this word. And I thought, no, that's actually the Scots word. I mean the word that I put in the book. So it allowed me to keep it in. But that was difficult because my editor wasn't, one of my friends said, well, don't worry, the editor will sort it out. She's Scottish. And I said, but she's not Scottish. I don't have a Scottish editor, so that's difficult too. And the publishers are based in Cambridge. So, but we got there somehow.
Yeah. It can be difficult. You mentioned the East Nook of Fife. I mean, I'm curious, why the East Nook of Fife? And how important is setting to your books? Because, to be honest, you're the only person I know that sets their books in the East Nook of Fife.
Oh, because there is Marion Todd actually writing now.
Ah, right. Marion's in the East Nook of Fife,
that's right. She's more sort of St Andrews way. That is.
Well, there are people in St Andrews. I will give you that. Is it Hank Muir puts his in St Andrews as well?
That's right. But for me, that is just, as you ladies know, every part of Scotland is, it has its own unique character. And I fell in love with the East Nook of Fife. And I love that. I love the question about setting, because for me, setting's really important. I think it helps if you have a strong setting. I think it really helps anchor the story in a particular place and time. And I've really enjoyed, one of the things I love when I write my books is actually the research. So I've really enjoyed discovering new places in Fife through my research. And so I can kind of weave a little bit of the history of the place. And so a lot of the action in that fifth book takes place, as you know, on the Isle of May, which is it's a tiny uninhabited island, just about 8 kilometers off the coastal fishing village of Anstruther. And it's got a really interesting history. It's got one of the very earliest Christian churches in Scotland. Mine is not the first murder to happen on that tiny island, because Danish invaders actually murdered St. Adrian, who became St. Adrian of May. But it's now become a nature reserve since the 1950s. It's got a fabulous puffin colony and a seal colony. But the only people really to live on that island now, because there have been communities obviously in the past, are the warden and the volunteers that look after the island. So in kind of setting my book on that island, I wanted to really bring in both that sense, because I haven't set a book on an island before, but I wanted to bring in that kind of sense of peace and tranquility that you can get from an uninhabited island. You can feel like you're miles away from, anywhere, civilization. But I also wanted to turn it on its head and look at how quickly the peace can be shattered when a sinister event like a suspicious death occurs. And that's the other thing about having a powerful setting, that it can become really hostile, when something bad happens. And I think that can be used to kind of create an up suspense in your books. Would you both agree with that? Would that be something?
Yeah. A closed setting can make... Yeah,
it is. That's right. It's the closed setting.
Can heighten the tension. I would agree. What about you, Christine?
Well, yeah, I think if you've got an isolated place or a closed setting, it increases that claustrophobic side of things, and maybe makes you feel more trapped in whatever situation that is. Yeah.
You've got Shetland, you've got that almost sort of closed island.
I'm trapped already.
Oh.
Can I say, if anybody's listening and they've got any questions, please feel free to type them in the chat. We'll answer all your questions. We're feeling a bit isolated ourselves here. It's all a bit strange, really, because we don't know who's listening, who isn't, and who's there. Is there anybody out there?
That's right. This is where it becomes quite like a seance, doesn't it? Tap twice if there's anyone there.
Has anybody got any more questions from the audience, from the panel, from?
I do.
was wondering what your favourite piece of writing advice would be. You know, if you've read or heard advice from people about things, what's
Wendy,
the one that's really helped you?
Have you got a piece of writing advice, Wendy? We could start with you, because I'm sure you've got loads in your career.
My writing advice is write. You know, you can't call yourself a writer unless you write, which is a dreadful thing to say, really. But everybody goes, where do I start? And I say, anywhere you like. Well, what do I write? What's the first line? I said, anything you like. Write about the paper clip on your desk if you can't get started. And then once you've said, I've got a blue paper clip on my desk, your brain will take over and you'll start writing what it was you wanted to write in the first place anyway. Because until you start putting a word down of some description, you're not going to get very far. But one of my favorite things I like to hear is that I think somebody said there are 5 rules of writing. Unfortunately, nobody knows what they are. So, you know, and I think that's great, because to be honest, people go, oh, do this, don't do that, do this, don't do that. I just say, do what you want. You know what I mean? It'll all sort itself out in the end. Just write your first draft any old way you want. Say anything you want. And then when you're finished it, 90,000 words later or whatever, worry about putting it into some semblance of order. You know, so that's what I
great
think.
advice. I mean, one of the things that I was, in fact, Christine's question, I'm so glad you asked that question, Christine, because that leads into one of my other questions. Okay. So one of my pieces of writing advice I would give people is that I often find, because I think, speaking to you all before, none of us are real plotters, are we? I think we all fly by the seats of our pants. And this is where I quite often come unstuck. You know, I'll have the opening scenes in my head, and because it's a police procedural, it'll kind of grow organically from that. But then I get into the middle part of the book, whereas Wendy sort of says it can sag. And that's where I think, particularly if you're not a great sort of structural plotter, you can start having real problems. And I remember Peter Robinson coming up with a great idea. I think he was quoting Raymond Chandler that said, bring in, if you get stuck and you don't know what to do, bring in a man with a gun. And so I thought, well, I'll go one better. I won't just bring in the man with a gun. I'll actually shoot someone and I'll create a murder. And I think I've actually done that in all 5 books. So you know, I'm giving things away now. You'll know when you get to the middle of my book when somebody's murdered. She got a bit stuck there. That's why she got another murder.
There's another thing that says, if you don't know what to do next, just kill someone. And somebody said, oh, Wendy must get stuck a lot then.
But in all seriousness, ladies, what do you both do when you get to the middle of your book? Do you get to the state where you start struggling, or it's like one of these puddings and you open the oven too early and it just, what do you do? How do you get beyond the difficulty?
Oh, Lindsay's back. I'm like this. It's up and down all the way through.
All the way through the book.
Yeah.
But I think there's
right next thing I'm sure of, and then hope for the best.
Being up and down is good because one, you can sort it out in the end, but 2, it gives you reader a bit of a breather, really, because if crime books, if they were tense all the way through, we'd all be dead of a heart attack, you know, because but when I'm sitting and there's I've got a saggy middle, I tend to do something else, like do the washing or something, and then you find that something will come to you. And then I tend to try and tidy it up a bit later on. I'll force myself to keep writing, to move on. I might write another chapter, and then while I'm writing a different chapter further on, because I think, that'll fit in later, what I want to do next in the middle, my saggy middle, will sort out. You need a bit of fitness exercises for our saggy middle.
So I have some questions. This one's from Colin Garrow. It says, hi, gals. Do you have any specific writing routines?
No.
Start.
I don't. I just write as and when.
What about you, Tana?
Oh, do you know, I don't want to say this in case that my publisher's listening to this, but I am actually probably the world's worst writer. So I don't have a routine. My day job is I'm a massage therapist when I'm allowed to work. What I tend to do is I write in fits and bursts and spurts. I can have several days that go really well, and then I might not write for a week. So and then I'll pick it up again. But of course, the longer you leave without writing, you have to familiarize yourself with everything you've previously written. So that's probably not the best piece of advice.
Well, I'm an any time, any place, anywhere girl, in a literary sense, I might add, before anybody gets the wrong idea. When we're allowed out of the house, do you remember back to the days when we were allowed to leave the house? Can you remember that far back?
No.
Well, I was never at home. I was everywhere. I was on trains. I was on planes. I was speaking. I was in hotels. I was living in other people's houses because I was visiting somewhere to do a talk. So I can literally write anywhere. I can write on trains. I can write on planes, not in cars, not even if I'm in the back of a car because I get car sick. I can't write on buses either. But I can write anywhere, in hotel rooms, in cafes, in libraries, wherever I am. So if I get a spare 10 minutes, I will write. So to be honest, I find it harder to write when I'm stuck at home because I'm so used to getting on a train and taking out my laptop, putting some earphones on and writing that I cannot get to grips with writing in the house. It's hopeless.
Procrastination is my worst thing.
Definitely.
So the next one is from Linda Wright and says, when do you distinguish between first draft and starting to edit it?
So I edit as I go on. I know a lot of the advice is to just bang that first draft out. I don't know, Wendy and Christine, whether you would agree with that, but for me, I have to say that I need to edit my first draft as I go, particularly the first few chapters, because I need to know that there's going to be something that's halfway decent. I think that's my own peace of mind. I don't know how you girls feel about that.
How do you do it, Christine?
Well, I write to the end and then get rid of about a quarter of it. That's basically what happens. But yeah, I mean, I might refine the odd sentence here and there, but I won't do any major edits until I've got to the end of the story.
Right.
How about you, Wendy?
To be honest, I tend to try and write to the very end. However, I will suddenly think, oh, Wendy, you forgot to investigate that dead body. You know, they all went and looked at it and haven't done anything with it since. So I will go back at that point and I will sort that out, because I know that if I don't, even if I write down, investigate that dead body, you know, that was on page 19, by the end, it won't fit in with what I'm doing. You know, so I will go back and sort it out. Sometimes for various reasons, you know, I will do a bit of an edit if I'm on a particularly noisy train, which can happen, and you're not really getting to grips with writing the next bit. You can sometimes do a bit of an edit in advance, or if you suddenly think, oh, that really needs tidying up and my brain won't go forward without tidying it, then I'll do it. But I do tend to try and write to the very end so that I've got a full story to actually edit.
Yeah.
That's a great question. I like it.
Yes.
And
the last one is from Chris Longview. It says, how has lockdown affected your writing? For example, are you writing more or less since lockdown?
Oh,
I'm writing less, I think.
Are you
I'm writing less. My Mojo, I'm very good with Mojo, but my Mojo decided to have a wee holiday. It went, we're not going out, so you must be having a break. Let's just, but I got it back again. But to be honest, I think like everybody, for the first 2-3 months of it all, my brain went into shock.
Yeah.
You know, I spent more time on the telly looking at the news than I did doing anything else. My brain froze, but then it picked up again. So yes. What about you, ladies?
So I found it quite interesting because when the first lockdown hit, I found I couldn't read. I couldn't read anybody's book. I just did not have that focus and attention. You know, the focus wasn't there. I think I was lucky in the sense that I knew I had a deadline and I knew when my book was going to be coming out. You know, I was having to write to the deadline of the book coming out on the 22nd, 23rd of August. So I was in my final drafts during lockdown. So I just had to kind of thrash it out. But any new writing, once the book came out, I had to take a couple of months off. Actually, I really struggled. What about you, Christine? Were you the same?
Well, yeah, I found it difficult because I'm not the most organised of people. So if there's no structure in my day, then quite often I don't achieve anything because I'll start doing one thing, then go off and do something else, and I kind of lose track of myself. But yeah, I tend to write in fits and starts anyway, so it's not a huge disaster. I've just happened to have about 3 or 4 different projects that I need to get down to.
That's a good question.
Yeah, I'm curious actually why both of you wanted to write crime. I mean, for me it was a no-brainer because I read crime. I'd been reading mysteries since, you know, the famous 5 when I was about 6 years old. So I've always been a mystery reader. But why crime?
Well, the same reason as you.
Yeah.
Essentially, I read crime, so I've wanted to write it. It seems to make more sense if you write something you want to read.
Well, I came from a really strange background. I've never admitted this before, and there's nothing to be ashamed of. I used to read a lot of romance.
Oh, heavens.
I know.
Now we really are getting down to the nitty-gritty.
Oh, yeah. And then I was going on holiday. This is before Kindles and laptops and all the rest of it. I was going on holiday and I went into a bookshop to try to, you know, buy another romance book. And a Peter Robinson, my favorite Peter Robinson book, In a Dry Season, which is, I think, is it the 8th or 9th book in his DCI Bank series, had actually been put in the romance section by accident, and I picked it up thinking it was a romance book, read the back of the book, and that's set in 2 timelines, 1940s and present day. Fell in love with the blurb on the back and bought the book, and then I just fell in love with his writing, and then I had to read everything he'd written, barring his PhD thesis, but only because I couldn't find it. Not that I'm a stalker. But yeah, and that's when I woke up in the middle of the night thinking, could I actually write a book? So that was weird, and that just got me into reading an awful lot more crime fiction.
You know, I think we ought to tell people where they can buy our books, you know, because I'm sure they're on the edge of their seat going, where can we get these books? Because nobody knows where they can buy books. Nobody.
Mine are on Amazon. That's the only place you can buy them.
And mine are Amazon. I mean, you might see 1 or 2 in bookshops, but at the moment, of course, we can't go into the bookshops. But I think probably mostly it's Amazon for me as well.
Well, mine are available wherever good books are sold. That's what they say, isn't it? Wherever good books are sold. Basically, you can get, if a bookshop's open, you can get them in bookshops. If you can get them from me via my website, wendyhjones.com. You can get signed copies from me, or you can get them on Amazon. You can get them on Kobo. You can get as ebooks. You can get them paperbacks on Amazon. You can get them on Kobo, Apple Books, anywhere, you know, anywhere you can get a book, you can get my book. I've been told you can get them in other countries as well. Somebody told me they got it in.
We should also have a plug for libraries, shouldn't we? That not everybody knows. Once the libraries are back open, if you go in and ask for one of our books to be brought in the library, am I right in thinking they do take, I think that's right, isn't it? They take the book to the library, and then every time somebody takes our book out the library, we get a few pence because we signed up with public lending rights.
Absolutely. So everybody, ask your libraries to buy our books. However, you might find your library at the moment says, we have no money because the council's underfunding us because of the COVID crisis. So be prepared that you may not get them to buy your book, but it's a brilliant idea. Thank you, Tana, for bringing that up. Because libraries are so important. Support your local library.
On that question, I think I remember Tana's books at one point were in the St Andrews Waterstones. I know the Fife Libraries, obviously.
Oh, lovely! I must go and thank them.
One would assume that Tana, both our books are in the Waterstones in St Andrews because we did an event there, didn't we?
That's right. Of course we did. Did we?
And we're in lots of Waterstones because we did lots of events in Waterstones.
We did.
And I need to give a shout out for my local bookshop as well. The Book House in Moneyfeith, when it reopens, guys, support them to the hilt. They're amazing. Amazing.
Fantastic.
We've got 1 more minute.
Well, I want to know if this might take more than a minute, so I'm sorry. Would you ever consider writing anything other than crime?
I'd love to write comedy.
Comedy. Hey, nice one.
Because my life is like an Ealing comedy most of the time.
Yes, I know that feeling. Yeah.
Something eventful happens virtually every day.
Mm-hmm. That's great. What about you?
Well, I've written for children,
yeah.
and I've got an unpublished one as well, which is a fantasy. It was supposed to be the first of a trilogy, but I haven't found a publisher for that yet. I'm waiting to hear. So. I don't know if there's anything else I would write, really. I might quite fancy having a stab at screenplays. So.
Oh, nice. Well, I'm writing a historical book at the moment, based nothing to do with crime, based on a true story of a young gentleman from early 19th century Scotland, and he went to Surgeons Hall, the medical college in Edinburgh, did his medical training, then joined the Royal Navy and sailed the 7 seas, appeared in various wars, and then ended up dying in China, and he's buried in China. And he was only 31. How he managed to do everything he did by the age of 31 is amazing. I just can't get my head around it, because he packed a lot into his 31 years of life. So that's what I'm doing at the moment. So
that's great.
They didn't have childhoods back then. They were at work at 11, 12, weren't they?
He probably went to medical school at 8 or something, you know.
Yeah.
I don't know. This is nothing to do with anything, but the most fascinating thing is I've got a lot of his research. I've got a lot of research. My dining room table, which is to the left of me, is completely covered in paperwork for this book, and I have got his copies of his medical notes that he wrote while he was at the so for philosophy, anatomy, and something else, philosophy, anatomy, and I can't remember what. I've got his notebooks that he wrote while he was in the lectures at the medical college.
Yeah. Wow.
Which has nothing to do with crime. I'm sorry, I've hijacked it.
But it's interesting. We don't care.
Technically speaking, Wendy, we all expect you to have like a million things on the go, kind of thing. You have
only a million.
Have, so many hats.
Do you know what? It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you guys. I love talking to you. Christine, I'd never actually met you, but I'm going to come to Shetland and visit you when we're allowed to travel. By the way, I'm not saying I'm going to come in your spare room before you think I'm trying to muscle in, you know what I mean? I've got to go to Shetland, and I've got to meet you, because you're so fascinating. And Tana, I'm looking forward to when we can do events together again.
Lovely. It'll be lovely. It's been a great panel. Thank you so much, ladies. And thank you to Lindsay for putting this on.
I should be going to my daughter's wedding in Dundee in July. So.
Oh, you're coming to Dundee in July?
Yeah, hopefully. My daughter's getting married.
Oh, you might have other things on your plate than meeting up with me. Much as I'd love to meet up with you, you might want to concentrate on your daughter, Christine. But if you find you've got a spare 10 minutes, ring me. I'll meet you. I'll meet you. I'd love to. Sorry, Lindsay, you've been amazing, and you've been very patient with us going over time.
No, that's fine. That's fine. Absolutely fine. You're not that bad. I mean, I think we went over about 8 minutes last night with Kirkland and Jackie. So yeah.
Oh, listen, with Kirkland and Jackie, you want to go over 8 minutes.
Oh, definitely.
The Dream Team panel.
It was amazing. I think it's all been great, actually. So the next panel is 6 o'clock to 7 o'clock, and it's Owen Mullen, Jim Odie, and Jonathan Whitelow, and it's Dark and Deadly Thrillers. Sounds interesting.
That'll be a good one.
For that one. Thank you so much, ladies, and definitely what you said. I mean, hopefully when events pick up again, being able to go and actually just support the arts, just once book festivals and all that are able to happen, and book events and any kind of events. Just get yourself out there and go and join. It doesn't matter if you know who the author is or know who the band or whatever. That's what I'm going to do. I'm just the first one. I'm just going. I don't care who it is. I'm just going to support them, because I have so missed it. It's been great to see everybody, and just try and do it online, but nothing beats going, having a night out and going to a book launch and just, listening to the author. And you might actually find that you think, oh, I wouldn't like a romance, or I wouldn't like this, or I wouldn't like a thriller, but actually no, you probably will find there's something in there that you will actually like. So just thank you so much, everybody. I'm just going to end the broadcast.
Thank you, Lindsay.